Well, the material is in hand. 6 sheets of 3/4 inch ply, 1 sheet of 1/2 inch ply, and 2 1/4 inch plies, not to mention some alder for all the trimmings. Murphy bed build starts now. Boom! Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're having an awesome day, and I want to thank you for tuning into this particular episode because, as you might have guessed, it is a big project. Before we get into it, I do want to thank everybody that has supported the channel and has been a part of Rockin' H Woodshop the entire time. We actually just passed 77,000 subs and it just keeps growing. So if this is your first time here, I want to welcome you. Be sure and click the subscribe button down below and click the notification bell, and that will alert you to anything brand new that I post. Also, my social media accounts are there for any behind the scenes look at anything Rockin' H Woodshop. So now, let's get into how to make this Murphy bed. Now, I will go ahead and tell you now that the design for this bed isn't mine. However, I did make some minor to moderate tweaks to make it fit my style and purpose. This particular bed is a full-size bed, but the hardware that I use can be purchased for either a twin, full, king, queen, vertical, or horizontal mount. Does not matter, they make hardware for it all. I'll leave a link down in the description below of the hardware that I purchased for this particular bed. And if you want to visit my Amazon store, anything that you see me using in my shop can be found in that store, and it helps me out to support the channel as well. So take a look at that. So as you've seen in the opening, there was a lot of plywood and a lot of hardwood. Now I did use maple ply for the 3/4, 1/2, and even the 1/4, as well as alder for all of the trim that went into making this project. So I first started out by taking the plywood and the alder to the table saw, milling it up to all the specific specs that my plan called for. And if you want to purchase those plans, you will find them on my website, and there will be a link in the description below as well. But I followed those plans to a T, and it gave me the appropriate amount of yield that I didn't have to buy extra material to make sure that I was able to finish the project. Now, after all the alder was cut and stacked up against an area in the shop, I went ahead and marked them with blue painter's tape just so I didn't get confused later on when I was ready to cut them. So one thing that I did do with the alder is I cut some thin, narrow 1/4 inch thick strips for edge banding on all of the exposed areas of the plywood that was going to be seen when the bed was not in use. I didn't apply it everywhere, but only whenever the bed was being seen folded up. I wanted to make sure it was a nice clean look. Once the edge banding was cured, I just took a sander and flushed them up to the surface of the plywood. Now the tops of the cabinets that you see right here are actually very wide, so I had to take some alder and panel them together with the help of a biscuit joiner, and while that dried, I was able to take care of some other things for the project. Now since all the plywood was cut to final dimension, it was time to set up the dado stack in the table saw to start cutting all the joinery that was going to accept the back, as well as the top and bottom of these flanking cabinets. Now the back is a 1/2 inch thick, so I did run a 1/2 inch groove down the length of the board, a 1/2 inch off the edge, and then the top and bottom are all 3/4 inch. Another thing I like to do before assembly is to take a drill and a drill bit slightly smaller than the size of a screw and pre-drill through the dado itself, or the rabbets, whatever you have. That way you're assured that whenever you go to put this together, you'll have a hole already made and there will be no guesswork as to where your screws need to go. Don't worry about these screws being seen from the other side because you are going to have trim that will cover it. Now with the help of an accurate jig that you can find in my Amazon store, I went ahead and made all the adjustable pinholes for the adjustable shelving in these flanking cabinets, and like I said, they are going to be from top to bottom. So I did take the time to put some alder on the edges of all of the pieces for the shelves just to cover up any rough plywood edging that will be seen. And then they will all be able to fit just behind the face frame. One last thing I had to do before installing all the pieces together is to notch out on the top and bottom to accommodate the face frame so it can go up underneath the crown molding trim, as well as the top being able to meet it and there won't be a gap. Now that all the prep work was done, it's time to put it all together. All the joints fit like a puzzle, so there's no guesswork involved. Once it's all glued in place, just screw it all together with the pre-drilled holes that you put in the dados and grooves earlier. Now you'll notice that the crown assembly is a two-part setup. I've actually taken some alder and ran it around the piece that's actually going to be seen on two sides, and then the other just has it in the front. It is met at the very top of the plywood to make room for the actual laminated top that we made earlier, and then the crown is just put in place between the two. I also went ahead and cut the bottom trim pieces as well for both cabinets and installed those. Now one thing you may be curious about is this little cutout right here. This particular cabinet is going up against a wall, and there just so happens to be a plug-in right here on that wall. So the owner wanted me to cut that section out so they would still have access to that plug-in. Now with these cabinets done, it was on to the main cabinet and the mattress carriage. Now inside the carriage there is a support structure that gives me a place to screw the 3/4 inch piece on the back side, as well as the 1/4 inch pieces that support the mattress on the opposite side. One of the two pieces actually gets a 3/4 inch wide rabbet running down the entire length of each support. Now on the sides of the mattress carriage that you can see here in the diagram have a curved edge that will need to be cut away. Also on the headboard there are two opposing curves that will meet the sides of the mattress carriage. To accomplish this curve, just measure equally on the top as well as the side, and then use a compass to draw your semicircle to cut it away with the jigsaw. There will be some minor cleanup with a sander to make sure that everything is flat, because as you know, a jigsaw doesn't exactly cut super square. Now the mattress side is going to be covered with 1/4 inch plywood. There's actually going to be two sheets because it's just a little bit too big for one. Now since I did all the prep work on the sides and the headboard, it's time to assemble all of that around the structure I just created. Now one thing I forgot to mention, when all the batch cutting for the rabbets and dados were done, I had to put rabbets on one end of the edges of the mattress carriage to accept the headboard. So once all the rounding over of those pieces were done, the rabbets made it very easy to assemble. Just pre-drill your holes before you glue it up. Now on to a little bit more specific joinery. I constructed all of the panels that you see here on the front face, as well as the headboard, with half-lap joinery. Now the headboard is attached by two screws right here on this panel and the opposing panel. It helps keep the whole cabinet from racking too bad and keeps it square. The joinery, like I said, is half-lapped, and it's all put together and glued to a 3/4 inch backer. Now you have the option of covering up the edge banding of the plywood if you don't want that seen. However, since this thing is folded up most of the time, I didn't worry about covering up that edge banding because it's only going to be seen when in use. And after staining and finish, it's pretty well disguised anyway. Now if you haven't seen my method on how to do half-lap joinery, I did a video series called Join It, which shows many different joinery methods, including this one. And it's a quick and easy method on how to achieve half-laps quick and easy without any measuring. Now the false front frame and panel look on this carriage was put together just like the headboard. And the 3/4 inch backer, I took careful time laying out where the screws were going to be, so whenever it was put onto the carriage assembly itself, all the screws were going to be covered up with the frames that I just made. Now it's time to assemble the main cabinet. I started with the header assembly, which, like I said, was put together with pocket screws, and I screwed those to the panels for the long part of the cabinet. This gave me a structure to build upon whenever I went to add the headboard, and two braces at the very bottom, which also allows me a spot for mounting whenever I go to install this. After all that was secured, then I started making the crown molding assembly using the top sections first in the rabbets that I cut out. Then I added the second layer, mitering it on both ends and then going all the way down. Then the crown molding just connects the two top and bottom pieces. Now with all the construction done, now comes time for the stain. The stain was a mixture that was done by the homeowner because it was already existing in their home. So they went to their local dealer and got that mixture done again specifically for this cabinet. Now I applied this stain with my Fuji 4-stage turbine sprayer, and because of that I only used about half a gallon of stain. So keep that in mind, that when spraying it will save you time, money, and improve the overall look of the finish. Once the stain had cured about a day, I went ahead and sprayed some pre-cat lacquer, about 3 coats worth, on the entire surface. I had to do the carriage in 2 stages because it is 2-sided, so I needed to make sure that one side had cured at least 24 hours before I was able to flip it over and do the other side. Now, when installing the hardware, I did follow the instructions pretty much to a T, with a couple of exceptions. The first one was the depth stop that's located on this panel inside the cabinet that the carriage actually stops against. It helps determine how far down the cabinet is going to go. However, because my top is a lot thicker than what's in the instruction manual for how to build one, I had to adjust where it was located from top to bottom. So I measured about an extra 5 inches from their location to mine. And if I measured from the top, my depth stop is roughly right about here versus the instructions, which would have put it right about here. So that is one change. The other was the locations of these holes right here for the pivoting hardware. I only changed those roughly about 5/16 of an inch, just so I can close the gap here a little bit more and give me minimal clearance whenever this thing tilted out, to where it would clear this without hitting it, but still close up the gap enough that it wasn't so gaping. Okay, I want you guys to pay attention to this, because the instruction manual for the hardware teaches you to build the cabinet around the mattress carriage, because there's not enough clearance when the hardware is installed to put the carriage in place if the cabinet is built separate from it. I figured out a way around that, however. Whenever you make the main cabinet, only permanently install the top. Everything else from the top down needs to be temporary. So the headboard that I made and the 2 braces / molding that I made is installed temporarily with pocket screws and sidewall screws. No glue. So whenever this was all finished and everything was ready to go, in order to install this, you have to take out these temporary pieces, the headboard and the moldings, to where the sides can slide apart ever so slightly while still being attached up here at the top. Then whenever you drop the carriage in, you just line the pivot points up on the carriage to the sidewall, and you screw it all back together, and it is now one piece. I repeat, do not make the main cabinet permanent until your mattress carriage is in place. Now, installation is pretty simple. 2 3-inch screws in the top, as well as probably 1 or 2 in the very bottom brace at the back side of the main cabinet. That brace in particular is not part of the Creative Bed's plans. That is another thing that I added to my own. It just gives me the option to screw into the base plate when there was none before. The 2 flanking cabinets are going to be screwed to the big cabinet as well, and also probably 1 or 2 locator screws in the studs going into the back side. Well guys, that wraps up the Murphy bed build. I hope that this video was informative enough. With the tight deadline that I had, it was very difficult to do my filming process the way I normally do. So I hope I didn't sacrifice too much content in order to be able to get my point across while trying to get it done in a timely manner. But I know the client's happy with it, I'm happy with it, and I'm hoping that with my plans in combination with this video, you guys can make one for yourself as well. Like I said, anything that I've used in my shop you can find in my Amazon store. My plans will be on my website, and all of those links will be down in the description below. If you haven't subscribed to already, be sure and do it, and hit the bell so you'll be notified every time I post new content. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope to see you on the next build process.